Welcome back to our house building series. I assume you've watched a few of the previous episodes. Most recently, the other mechanical trades going in. I've had several subcontractors in here that I've worked with for years, and you've seen what they've been doing for us. The last mechanical process that needs to be installed in here is the mechanical process that I know the least about, network. In fact, for me to say I know the least about it is misleading because it implies I know something about it. The fact is, I know nothing about networking, even though I am living in the 21st century. But fortunately, I have a son-in-law who's eminently qualified by education and by experience to take care of this for us. So Ben came down from Corvallis. He and Amanda have count them, 5 lovely grandchildren of mine. He brings them every time he comes or he's not invited. And so he's been working his magic inside this project. Come on in and get a look at what he's been putting in for us.
Let me introduce you to Asher. He's my oldest grandson and one great kid. Actually, you've seen him and his brother Aaron on the channel, I don't know, maybe 3 years ago now. They were helping me prepare the subgrade in order to pour a concrete floor in the shop. He's grown at least a foot since then, and I just could not be more proud of this guy. It would sure be nice if he lived a little closer so that we could team up on more projects like this, but I am just grateful for the time that we do get to hang out and do stuff. The first task that Asher's working on is bringing a line of RG6 coax cable through the house to the closet in the office, which will serve as our media hub. In our neighborhood, the internet is provided by the cable company, and this is the cable they will connect to on the outside of the house to provide service, just about like all the other utility companies. Now, some people might choose to run these coax cables into every room and every location where a TV could possibly be used. The real point of this video is not to explain all of the places that you might want to run phone, coax, fiber, or speaker cables for that matter, but more to emphasize that right now is your chance to get it done fairly painlessly. Now, the fact that we are not running every possible line to every possible location is probably going to frustrate or stress some of you who are more technologically minded, but we've decided to only run Cat6 cable throughout the house. Yes, there will be network jacks in every room as well as network cables run to each of the corners of the house, where a homeowner may very well someday want to add security cameras. These cables will all terminate in a rack switch system that will be installed when we are trimming the house out.
So this is the point in the house where all of the network lines come into one spot. This is command central right here. And yes, it looks like kind of a spider web right now, and maybe the spider was not completely in control of his faculties when he did this, but it's not done. Ben's going to have this all tidied and zip tied and labeled and put where it goes, because there are 24 separate network jacks in this house. That's probably more than anybody's ever going to need. But if they do need them, it's way easier to put them in now than to have to be fishing through and cutting drywall and just making a mess of your living space when we can do it now for very little money and very little labor. And speaking to that, of the mechanical systems that have been put in this house over the last period of time that you've watched, the network system, these Cat 6 lines, are by far the least expensive and the least labor intense. It goes in easy. It doesn't cost much. And so there's no good reason not to put jacks everywhere that anybody might ever have the desire to have access to whatever information these little blue cables will carry.
Technical note here, remember when you're drilling through studs and top plates that the inside of the hole must be at least 1.25 inches from the edge of the stud. This makes it practically impossible for a drywall nail or screw to penetrate and wreck the cable when the drywall is being nailed in place. Now, if you don't get this right, the inspector's probably going to call you on it, and all you got to do is install a nail plate that covers the possible point of interference in order to solve the potential problem.
The task that we're doing here today is what's called pulling cable, but it's not a very good term because our cable is actually really delicate. So this is category 6 cable. We'll talk more about the specifications here in a minute, but what the number one thing you have to worry about with this cable is getting it kinked. For example, you can see how it's got a bit of a bend to it there, and it'll try to hold that bend. But if we put a kink in it like that, that is now what we call a break. You actually have to cut the cable at that point because it's so sensitive that now the networking signals that travel around that cable are now disrupted and slowed down by that. So you have to be so careful when you're pulling it carefully through these holes that it doesn't bind in these little loops. A good way to think about the term here is that instead of pulling the cable, even though that's what we call it, you're pushing the cable. So as you're pulling it through the different holes, you're at the same time providing that tension and pushing it through to keep the cable from getting kinked, and you're feeling it move through your fingers so that when these little bends come across, you're straightening them out as they go and then pushing them through the lines. It's really pretty fragile stuff, and when it bends and develops these little kinks in them and then gets pulled back straight again, it can be almost impossible to find. And once you put up the drywall and cover it all up and then put the ends on to test them in a computer later, if it's all buried in the walls, you're never going to find those breaks without cutting into your wall. It's just awful. Okay, so our cable here is called Category 6 cable. And what it consists of is 8 separate wires, and each of those wires is a solid piece of copper. The reason I bring that up is because if you go to the hardware store, if you go to the big box store, you're going to find network cable, but it'll be stranded. Each of these 8 wires is composed of many different little strands of copper, and it's very bendy, and that's what you use to connect your printer to your router, that kind of thing. But that kind of cable is not what you want to put in walls because it's not good for long distance transmission. This cable has 8 individual solid copper wires that are much, much better at transmitting high-speed communications. And it's because of that solid copper that makes it so able to get kinked and broken. So category 6 is the standard, and some of the numbers that you would want to look at to put in a home are, it's going to be CMR, and CMR is the code for something that is designed for risers. And what a riser is, a riser cable, is that when you have the cable inside a wall, if a fire starts, the fire will tend to burn the jacket of that plastic wire. It doesn't really care about the copper, but it does really, really like the plastic of the wires. So the fire will start and it will burn upwards and spread the fire throughout the building. Something with a CMR code that's rated for risers is designed to burn much, much slower up the cable. So it's safe to put inside walls. So your code is going to vary for wherever you are. There is a cable rated higher than this called plenum cable, and that's designed for being inside air spaces, air cavities like ducts and things like that. But that's not normally needed inside just a standard wall. There are higher categories of cables, but for the most part, they are marketing speak. So Category 6 is the standard that's now used within office buildings, within homes. So you don't need to be looking at Category 7s, Category 8s. A lot of those standards haven't been finalized yet. So if you bought a bunch of that, it may not actually conform to any given standard. It might be specific to a proprietary system. So stick with the Cat 6. It's what's on the shelf and it's the way to go. And again, remember, solid cable is what you're putting in your walls. I wanted to show some of the separation that you need to do with data cables when compared to the 120 hertz or 120 volt lines. The trick here is that flowing electricity creates a magnetic field around that flowing current. And if your lines are parallel, then that magnetic field that's going in a circle will go around your wire and it will induce an electrical signal, current down that line. So to try to mitigate the effects of the electrical interference on a raw power line and one that's trying to carry data, which is very sensitive and delicate in terms of the signals that are being passed, we want to make sure that there's some separation involved here. So when we're parallel, we want to be a foot away. And when we have lines that are perpendicular, we want those perpendicular lines to be an inch away. So here you can see we have a 120 volt line at 60 hertz. And here we have our networking lines, and they are an inch apart perpendicular, and these are running up to about 550 megahertz inside the lines at around 40 volts. So, and DC, and this is AC, so different types of electrical systems. So a foot apart for parallel and about an inch apart for perpendicular. If the only thing that you pull away from this is to keep the data lines away from the power lines, don't run them through the same hole. That's the take-home lesson. I know you've got a nice big hole there where the electrician ran his cables through. Don't be tempted to run your data cables through. It will simply destroy the signals that you're trying to push through that line. Keep them out of those holes. The rest of my job for the day is going to be to go through and clean up what we've done. At this point, we've pulled all those cables through, but as you can see, they're kind of hanging around. And that for anybody who's looking at that and getting anxious, people who've been in the trade and know about pulling cables, and it bothers them how sloppy things look, that's the state of the cables when you pull them. And I wouldn't be able to sleep tonight if I didn't come back through here and Velcro and connect and tape and bundle and label everything correctly. Because at the end of this, we have to turn this into a functioning network. Every single cable has a specific destination on both ends. They all come together into the central point. There's no daisy chaining of these wires around. So I have to know at that central point where every cable is going to, and at those endpoints, I have to have those all spooled up and ready to go for when the drywall goes up on top of it. So the beautification here isn't just for the aesthetics of it, but it's so that functionally we can turn it into a network that'll be functional here for another decade.
Now, in addition to data, network cables also carry electricity, so they can be used to power devices like cameras and modems without a separate outlet. They're used for TVs, printers, network storage devices, cameras, wireless modems, you name it. And as far as plain old internet goes, nothing comes close to a hardwired connection for speed and reliability. Yet. It is so interesting to me that just a handful of years ago, this sort of low voltage work only existed in commercial construction, with big computer rooms and removable flooring and chases. But nowadays, these little blue wires are going to be vitally important to every aspect of how the people who live here live their lives. They will be tightly connected, for better or worse, to the whole wide world, right here in each of the rooms and nooks and crannies of their home. Man, I hope that they don't let it steal away all of the things that are sweetest and most important as they raise their families and live out their days.
Thanks again for joining us on our series. If you have questions about this Cat 6 cable or the boxes or anything else that you've seen us put in, we ordered it off of Amazon. The link to that Amazon page is in the notes to this video. You can check that out. And it's easy to get a hold of, it's easy to install, and it is the thing that everybody needs in the 21st century. So as always, thank you for watching Essential Craftsman, and keep up the good work.